presentation with Michael Sandel and Anna Deavere Smith. As we get underway, I want to acknowledge that our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. And we thank you all for tuning in. Town Hall is grateful for the opportunity to invite Seattle audiences and beyond into present tense exchanges of issues, ideas, and creativity, even when we can't do it in person. Town Hall will continue to produce online content throughout this fall and into the new year, and as circumstances allow, to even host live streams from our building. Meanwhile, if Zoom or YouTube fatigue hasn't fully set in, many of our past talks are available in video or podcast form in our digital media library. But back to tonight's event. The program will likely run about 30 minutes, followed by an audience question and answer session. Michael and Anna will take questions from the Ask a Question field at the bottom center of your screen. Please keep your questions concise so they can get to as many as possible. Also, know that you can view the event both here on Crowdcast or over on our YouTube page if you want to utilize that platform's closed captioning feature. Town Hall's adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming programs include Michael Denzel Smith posing big questions about what kind of country we want to be, Senator Sherrod Brown about 8 progressive senators who changed America, and back-to-back nights this week with Jill Lepore, Friday about her new book on the invention of data collection, and Saturday's special benefit for Town Hall based on her Harvard course, The History of Evidence, as well as upcoming appearances by Michael Ian Black, Howard Gardner, the brilliant music critic Alex Ross, and conversation with the equally brilliant Ann Powers. You'll find plenty more about most of the above already posted online at townhallseattle.org. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Our Civic Series is supported by the Real Networks Foundation, the True Brown Foundation, KUOW, and the Wincote Foundation Northwest. But as most of you know, Town Hall is fundamentally a member-supported organization, and I want to thank all of our members watching tonight. When I thank you for your support, know that it's because we're grateful to you all for actually purchasing a ticket to tonight's event. The response to COVID-19 has posed unprecedented challenges to nonprofits, and if you support Town Hall's mission to make ideas and inspiration accessible to the whole community, we hope you will consider further support with a membership or by making a donation through the button at the bottom of your screen. Last, this isn't an easy time for booksellers either, and since we know you want to consider Professor Sandel's case in greater detail than even this conversation, I urge you to buy a copy of the book here tonight through our local independent partners at Third Place Books, also by using the button at the bottom of your screen. All right. Michael Sandel teaches political philosophy at Harvard University. His legendary course, Justice, has been viewed by tens of millions and was the first Harvard course to be made freely available online. When people use that term public intellectual, Professor Sandel is what they mean, a compelling communicator who extends the reach of philosophy beyond the academy through platforms like his BBC series, The Public Philosopher, which explores the big ideas hiding in plain sight behind the headlines. Another BBC series, The Global Philosopher, leads discussions on ethical dimensions of issues like immigration and climate change. His books, meanwhile, which have been translated into 27 languages, relate enduring themes of political philosophy to the most vexing moral and civics questions of our time. He's the author of 7 altogether on justice, ethics, democracy, and the markets, including international bestsellers like Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do from 2009, and What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets, published in 2012, and both were the occasions of his last 2 visits to Town Hall. Anna Deavere Smith is an acclaimed playwright, actor, and educator with a singular style of documentary theater that explores community, diversity, and character in the sense of values and behavior here in America. She's the founding director of the Institute on the Arts and Civic Dialogue, launched at Harvard over 3 summers, but now housed at NYU, where she's a professor at the Tisch School of the Arts. Among her many honors, she's the recipient of a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship, commonly called the Genius Grant, a National Humanities Medal, and a Guggenheim Fellowship. The occasion of their conversation is Professor Sandel's book, The Tyranny of Merit, What's Become of the Common Good. One of the only upsides, frankly, of this online season is the number of conversations. We call them impossible conversations because they would be impossible in the analog town hall. And so I'm sincerely grateful for the chance to welcome both Anna Deavere Smith and Michael Sandel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is really your evening, Michael. And I'm crazy about the book. I've been telling everybody about it. I feel it's a very important book for this moment. And so maybe we could just start out by you talking about why this book and why now, and who are you provoking? Who are you talking to?
Right. Well, thank you for that, Anna. And before I do, let me just say what a privilege and honor and a sheer treat it is to be with you, Anna. We're friends, but I've also admired you for many, many years and the role you play in bringing together the arts and civic life. So thank you so much for doing this. Our civic life isn't going very well these days. The reason, I think, is that the divide between winners and losers has been deepening for decades, poisoning our politics, driving us apart. And the new book, The Tyranny of Merit, What's Become of the Common Good, tries to explain why this polarization. Part of it is the deepening inequality of income and wealth, but it isn't only the material inequality. It also has to do with the changing attitudes towards success and failure that have accompanied this inequality. In recent decades, those who've landed on top have come to believe that their success is their own doing, the measure of their merit, and by implication, that those left behind must deserve their fate as well. Now, this way of thinking about success, paradoxically, arises from a seemingly attractive ideal. The ideal of meritocracy, the idea that if chances are equal, those who rise, those who succeed, those who clamber up the ladder of success, deserve their winnings. If everyone starts out from an equal starting point in the race, then the winners deserve their winnings. It seems to be an attractive, appealing, even inspiring ideal, this idea of merit and success and reward and desert. But it has a dark side. And we're living through that dark side right now. The dark side is that, well, part of the problem is we don't live up to the meritocratic principles we proclaim. We don't really have equal chances. We know that. But there's even a deeper problem. The ideal itself is flawed. Meritocracy has a dark side. And it's this: meritocracy, even a perfect meritocracy, is corrosive of the common good. And the book tries to explain why this is so. The reason it's corrosive of the common good, well, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to quickly say, the reason it's corrosive of the common good is that if it's really true that the winners deserve their place and that those who struggle deserve theirs, a perfect meritocracy even, much less our imperfect version, generates hubris among the winners and humiliation among the losers. And that, I think, is what has happened in recent decades. And if those left behind feel humiliated, if they feel that elites look down on them, that is a recipe for anger, resentment, and backlash. And that's exactly what we've seen. By 2016, we saw the populist backlash against meritocratic elites. So that, Anna, in broad terms, is the picture. That's the diagnosis of how we wound up with such a rancorous, polarized politics. What do you think?
I mean, and I feel in some ways that you're talking in particular about the white people who really did believe they had a chance, right? But we are also seeing extraordinary rage amongst Black people, BIPOC people, progressive people right now, because the system is failing them in so many ways at the moment. I would talk a little bit about why the word merit has a kind of a moral tinge.
Right, right. Because, well, merit really, we use it in two ways. The people will listen to this diagnosis and say, wait a minute, isn't merit a good thing? Isn't it a good thing if jobs and social roles and opportunities, even the chance to govern, to have a voice, are allocated according to people's merits, unfettered by disadvantages or prejudices of race or class or gender? Isn't that a good thing? And it is a good thing, but merit also has another meaning, which is not only that everyone should have an equal chance to compete for jobs and social roles, but also this element of desert, which is, I think, what you're referring to by this moral claim.
Yeah.
The claim is that those who land on top, those who succeed, those who climb the ladder of success, fair and square, they exercise their talents, they deserve it. They deserve the material rewards that the market heaps upon them. And that's the rub, or at least the beginning of the rub, because those who don't enjoy those material rewards are looked down upon by those who do, if those on top truly believe they deserve it, that their success is their due.
Yeah. I mean, I think this, but let's think about what the other side was. You know,
Right.
I'm thinking about, say, for example, my parents growing up in segregation and the Depression. And my grandfather being a chauffeur on my mother's side, and my grandmother being a laundress on my father's side. They had a better time of it, I think. My grandfather had a business, pretty successful business. But this idea of the at the so-called bottom of the metaphoric ladder, we've also lost the dignity of work.
Right.
So we've lost the opportunity to go here, but
Right.
we've also lost the dignity of work.
Right.
And in a very sort of basic way, I wonder if that's because of aspiration. That is that everybody's got aspirations. When I go to a restaurant in New York, jokingly, I'll say, "Are you an actor?" Right. One of my favorite answers was, "No, I'm a seagull." It's an allusion to Chekhov's. But nobody's doing what they do in my world, except the guy who sells Christmas trees, and I get my Christmas trees from him every single year, Jim Van Houten. So there's also this way that many people are escaping. You use the word escape. It's not just people who are escaping to the top, but many people are escaping. It's as though none of us are really standing on the earth. So then how could we have a common good?
Right. Well, let me pick up on your image of the ladder, because this is the metaphor that contains a lot of the tensions we're discussing. There are a couple problems with the ladder of success in our society. One of them is, despite all of our talk about meritocracy and the rhetoric of rising, as I call it in the book, people still do not have an equal chance to climb the rungs of the ladder. That's one problem. But there's another problem, which is that the rungs on the ladder are growing further and further apart. And I'll come to the dignity of the work in a moment, because that gets right to the heart of this. And why would the dignity of work be undermined or depreciated by the project of meritocracy? Why would it? For two reasons. First, if we look at the politics of recent decades, Democrats and Republicans alike, they've said, yes, the market-driven globalization that we've given you, has created deeper and deeper inequalities. But here's how we'll deal with that inequality. Not directly, but indirectly. If you go to college, if you get a degree, then you will be able to compete and win in this new economy. Then you will be able to enjoy individual upward mobility. Well, that's inspiring in a way. Everyone should have an opportunity to rise. Emphasizing university education, that's a good thing. I'm all for that. How could I be against that? And yet, by making individual upward mobility through higher education, by presenting that as the solution to inequality, that sends a message that if you don't go to university, if you don't have a 4-year college degree, your failure is your fault, and the work you do almost doesn't matter. Credentialism becomes a kind of prejudice. The political parties, center left and center right, the mainstream parties who made this offer, who said individual upward mobility, that's the solution to inequality, missed the fact, well, first, it's not easy to rise in America, despite what we tell ourselves. It's harder to rise one generation from the next in America than it is in many European countries. That's one problem. But the deeper problem is the one that you mentioned about the dignity of work. Most people don't have a 4-year university degree. Nearly 2/3 don't in this country, in Britain, and in most of Europe. So creating an economy that sets as a necessary condition for dignified work and a decent life a 4-year university degree, that excludes nearly 2/3 of the population, and it generates a harsh ethic of success, a credentialist prejudice.
Not to mention this,
that disparages those who do work who don't have a degree.
Not to mention the flawed, very flawed, and now you begin the book reminding us of the corruption to get to college, right? I was talking to a man who was very upset that his son they went to all these places, right? And he's going to Cal, it's a great school, but why didn't he get into Stanford? Why didn't he get blah, 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 blah? I get it. And I always have your book in the back of my mind. But now you talk about your students at Harvard being depressed in a way. I'm like, well, that started when you were 2.
Right.
And your parents were, I don't know, ready to kill somebody to get you into a good preschool. I mean, that's what's going on in these last 2 generations, which is unbelievable to me. And the values. I mean, when I hear my friends talk about just the birthday parties and what they spend, it's shocking to me. So that the kids can feel welcomed and as they belong in these elite environments. They're learning about this kind of elitism very young.
Right. The credentials.
Depressed by the time they're at your class.
Right. First, it's worth noticing, I want to come to the kids who actually survived this meritocratic gauntlet of high pressure that you're describing. First, it's worth pointing out what to me was a shocking finding by some economists who studied this. At Ivy League universities, for all of their generous financial aid policies, there are more students from the top 1% than from the entire bottom half of the country put together. So that's how affluent parents have figured out how to pass their privilege on to their kids. And the way they do it, coming to your point and to what your friends are describing and doing, the way they do it exacts a pretty heavy price on the psychic well-being of their kids. Because what we've done is we've turned the adolescent years, the teenage years of kids in affluent families who are competing for these selective universities into a stress-strewn gauntlet of high pressure achievement, hoop jumping, SAT tutors and prep courses, extracurricular activities, the better to impress admissions committees, internships, good works in distant lands to bolster the application and to give fodder for the essay. All of this overseen by some, in the case of some kids, by high-priced private college admissions counselors, not to mention the ones involved in the scandal that we saw last year, where it was outright fraud. But even short of the scandal, it's a scandal what happens. And it's not only, the tyranny of merit does not only exert itself toward those who are left out. That's one very serious problem. It also wounds the winners, because by the time these young people arrive in my classes, many of them are so driven by the demand to please their parents and teachers and admissions committees and to jump through one more hoop that they find it difficult to step back and figure out what they really care about, what's worth caring about. Let
me push you on this for a minute, because I'm thinking about your high school and that extraordinary picture you gave of your math class, where according to your score, your seat was changed, right? And not only that, you know, when you were 17 or 18, you invited Ronald Reagan for a debate in front of all of these people. So you couldn't have been a slouch, and you must have been very competitive, and the pressure was coming from somebody or inside yourself. You wound up okay. So what's the difference?
Well, but now I've written a book against this, Anna.
So maybe it didn't. But is there much of a mark on you in Pacific Palisades as some of these kids you're talking about at Harvard?
Right. Well, I should explain about this math class you're telling.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
It's a story in the book. When I was 14 in the 8th grade, I went to public schools, junior high and high school, in Pacific Palisades, California. It was in an affluent area, though a public school, heavily tracked. And all of the kids in the AP track, essentially, there were 2,400 kids in the school, but we hung out. We spent almost all of our days, you know, in the company of those 30 or 40 kids in this AP track. And in the 8th grade math class, there's a story I tell in the book, after every quiz and exam, the teacher would rearrange the seating. And that's because the seating in the first 3 rows was in the order of your grade point average to the 100th decimal as of that day. And he rearranged the seating, announced the new seating arrangement before giving back the quizzes and the exams. So I wasn't great at math. I was sort of good, but not great. So I was usually in the first row, but not in the first seat. Maybe in the second or third or fourth or fifth. So if one day, say I was in the 3rd seat, and he says, all right, now in the 3rd seat is so-and-so. Well, that's not me. I've got to pick up my books and sort of stand there. Maybe I'll be in the 4th. No, that was somebody else. So I walked back to the 5th. So I was 14. We were 14 when we go in. I thought this was how school worked, but it was actually my first introduction to this meritocratic way of inculcating the drive to compete. And, well, you say I turned out all right. Bless you, Anna, for that. But I noticed that this was only the beginning. And these pressures have intensified. And I'm aware that the young people who arrive in my classes are up against even more intense pressures than we ever imagined back in Pali High, with that weird seating arrangement in the math class. And that worries me. It's not the only problem with the tyranny of merit. The bigger problem is the lost dignity of work, the resentment, the looking down on those who don't flourish. But it's worth noticing that the tyranny also exacts a toll even on the winners, and that should provide a basis grounds for all of us to take a step back and ask, how can we reconceive, how can we renew a politics of the common good? And I think it means having a certain distance from this way of thinking about success.
I agree. Now, you know, I've written you something that I consider a sort of love poem to your book. And I thought I would read that now.
Please.
More, and then soon we'll take questions.
Yeah.
And so, you know, everybody, this is not dead on. You know, I'm not a philosopher. So this is a metaphor that I was inspired to write after reading The Tyranny of Merit. So there are two parts to it. Part one, and I'm an actor, and so the first part's about Hollywood. Part one, in the land of smoke and mirrors, there is a real hotel, which I will call the Hotel Merit Hollywood, just a quarter block south and a half block west of one of the busiest intersections in all of Southern California. It has a facade of quiet opulence. The semicircular broad driveway is adorned from around 8 a.m. till dusk with a Lamborghini, a McLaren, and a Bentley. The house car is a Rolls. The entertainment industry movers and shakers do breakfast, lunch, and cocktails there, breakfast costing about $100 for two people. And the shakers don't eat much. They're quite fit. Sprinting up and down the meritocratic ladder is done without breaking much of a sweat, no matter how far apart the rungs are. Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, Yale, et al. Don't always appear on the resumes of the elite here. To be sure, there's a healthy contingent of alums, but the only necessary credential to have a special table at the Hotel Merit poolside is the ability to make money and or noise. That is, to attract attention. Helps to have a couple movie stars in your stable or pantry for leverage. They used to say the bar was lined with the most accomplished hookers. Needless to say, they too worked hard to get the top of their profession. Don't know if that's something the concierge even dares wink about in these Me Too days. Where's my page 3? Oh, here it is. Those in power in Merit Hollywood seek to be, Michael, and maybe we need to pull this up when we talk. You've pulled, Michael, to use the words you've pulled from the liberal speak thesaurus, on the right side of history. Yeah. On the right side of history. One of the most powerful agencies in town, extending to offices in 14 cities and 6 nations, represents the founders of Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. Here comes the main character of this part of my tale. It was dusk in the parking lot of the Hotel Merit Hollywood. I was waiting for the parking attendant to swing around with my rental car, not a Lamborghini. A standard poodle arrested my breath. She, I think it was a she. Poodle royalty. Well-bred, racehorse legs, not a silly haircut, groomed with taste. Taste. That's a word they throw around at the Merit. Taste. She was obviously well-educated, tutored daily. I did not sense hubris. Her intelligence came piercing through a focused gaze. Every ringlet of her thick coat fell as it should. A beautiful jeweled collar, maybe fake jewels, but you never know. It's the land of excess where even a dog's sense of self depends on a little bit of bling. She wasn't dressed in a dog park, though. Even if her deep desire was to play with the others, I suspect that if her nanny didn't rescue her, she'd escape on her own. She was not bred to cavort. All she was bred for is to look like $1 million. Part 2. The apartment building, I'll call it the Tudor Downs, is situated in New Haven, where there's Yale, and then there's everybody else. The Downs is a beat-up place. It's in everybody else's part of town. I and my collaborators were boarded there while rehearsing Let Me Down Easy, my 2008 play about resilience and vulnerability, the body versus the healthcare system, the body versus the state, life versus death, winning versus losing. Michael, you know about that play because you were among the real people I interviewed and portrayed in the New Haven version. Many who work with me in my plays, in fact, did attend Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford. But we have very little hubris. And that lack of hubris is about money. Those in consistent power, including our unions, I suspect, are banking on an assumption that we who are skilled performers, directors, writers, designers, assistants, choose to work in nonprofit institutions because we have something burning in our hearts to say, and saying it is pay enough. And then some of us buy into the mission statements of nonprofits, creating community, the betterment of society, perhaps even the common good, etc. Here's the relevant action of this part of my presentation. Memphis, my dog, lived with me 17 years, but it was not until our 7th year together during our sojourn at the Tudor Downs that I learned of her gifts. The realization was, to use your words, Michael, from that interview I did of you in 2007, unbidden. Memphis had no pedigree. The vet said she was part Australian cattle dog, other part anybody's guess. She was not educated, and that's my fault. She was, like the rest of her breed, smarter than human. She was smarter than me, so even as she showed a great deal of potential at puppy school, I flunked out. And as well, the owner, or as they kindly say, the parent, the owner, Michael, the parent, the owner, has to get trained as well. With my dismissal came hers. A fire alarm went off in the Downs in the middle of the day. Our rooms were on maybe the 18th floor. People I'd never seen, some of them in pajamas, poured out of rooms into hallways and down the stairs. Much to my horror, as we ran down the stairs, Memphis ran back up the many floors. Australian cattle dogs are herders, and her herding DNA revealed itself instantly. Never trained to herd, but she knew the task. She had the dignity about her work that she was bred to do. No matter how many times I screamed for her to come with me, singular me, her owner, she herded everybody else, previously unknown to her, out of the building with resolve and utmost purpose. I guess Memphis understood the common good, and it prevailed.
Bravo.
I'll close with words from the 2000 interview I conducted of Michael in Let Me Down Easy. I'm not going to perform them. Some of my favorite parts relevant to the discussion of tyranny of merit, the tyranny of merit. I quote, this is from an interview with Michael, based on his book, The Case Against Perfection. In the 20s and 30s, there were state fairs that awarded prizes called fittest family prizes. You would go to a state fair, and alongside the livestock competitions where they would give blue ribbons for the best bred cattle or the best bred pig, they were doing the same for human beings. And people would enter, and they would give their genetic information, their medical history, and they would award prizes for the fittest families, just as they gave gold medals to the fittest cattle and the best bred pig. And what we're doing now, today, in the name of helping our children, equipping our children, we are gradually, without being aware of it, turning parenting into manufacturing as if the child is a consumer good. We're using technologies to fit ourselves to the world that happens to be. We should change society to fit us, rather than to try to change our bodies to fit the social roles that could be otherwise. It is a lack of moral imagination. The tyranny of merit raises many important questions. One of my questions is, how much of our instinct towards the common good has been bred out of us? Or is it there? Like Memphis's herding. She was an orphan found on the side of a highway in Tennessee, probably because I'm told she proved as a puppy to be gun shy. There were no papers to document her aptitude, but her herding instinct emerged once the need was there. What skill sets do we have that we don't even know we have because we've not practiced or because we are numb to the needs around us? Have we lost our instinct to protect the common good?
Wow. Wow.
Have we, Michael? Have we lost it?
Wow. That is an amazing story, Anna. And I disagree with only one thing you said when you said that you're not a philosopher. Because this story is as deeply philosophical, certainly as my book or as anything I've read lately by a philosopher. May I tell you why?
Sure. I'll take it. I'd love to know why.
Okay. We've got Poodle, the fancy dog, the purebred. She was not bred to cavort, to mix and mingle in unpredicted, uncontrolled ways with others. And then there's Memphis, who had no pedigree. And the key thing about Memphis is that Memphis was unbidden, you tell us. An accident of sorts, not a deliberate project, not brought into being as a project of control or mastery or merit. And it turns out that Memphis, the product of accident, the unbidden mutt, had somehow an impulse for the common good. So the moral of the story, as I understand it, the story of the purebred poodle on the one hand, and merit, the unbidden mutt on the other, is that the antidote to the tyranny of merit has a lot to do with the appreciation, the recognition of the role of chance, accident, luck, fortune in life. The antidote, and here's why I see this story as a companion tale to my book, The Tyranny of Merit. The antidote to the meritocratic hubris of elites is a greater recognition of that our success is due in large part to the luck and good fortune that helped us on our way, to family, to neighborhood, to community, to country, to the circumstances of life in which we find ourselves. And insofar as we can recognize the role of luck in life, we are more open to the common good. And the reason...
Maybe, let me just say one thing, and then
Yeah.
we'll take some questions.
Yeah.
Because, there are so many things, I'm so happy that I knew the case against perfection, because in some ways, this book, The Tyranny of Merit, is a follow-up to that.
Yeah.
And one of the things you talked to me back when we were talking about the case against perfection was that we've lost our openness to the unbidden.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it makes me, that's what you were talking about in 2008. Now,
Right.
so it makes me wonder if the common good is connected with being open to the unbidden.
Yes.
Yeah, say something about that.
Yes.
Yeah, right?
Because if we really believe that we are self-made and self-sufficient, it's very hard to imagine ourselves in other people's shoes. But if we recognize the role of the unbidden and luck, then we're more likely to look on those less fortunate than us and say, there, but for the accident of fate or the luck of the draw or the grace of God go I. And that impulse, which is an impulse that arises with a recognition of the unbidden, accidental aspects of what lands some of us on top, that impulse, that sensibility is a beginning of the way back from the harsh ethic of success that drives us apart. And bringing this back to politics, it points us maybe toward a less rancorous, more generous public life. It points toward a solidarity that's cut off if we think of ourselves as wholly self-made and self-creating, and therefore entirely responsible for whatever success we manage to achieve, the unbidden.
It's almost as if, as we mentioned, luck, chance, magic,
Yeah,
spirituality, all of that gets dried up.
it does. It
Right?
does. It does. Mystery, tragedy, luck, fortune. This being alive to this dimension of life and of our fate opens us to the possibility of sharing a common, well, I'll put it this way, makes it more likely that we will cavort.
We will,
unlike Poodle with others.
The poodle should be able to cavort, and Memphis should be able to borrow the poodle's jewels should she like to. But one last thing, and then we must open for questions. I also just loved so much, it stuck with me all these years, you quoting Immanuel Kant, out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made.
Right.
And we become so controlling.
Yeah.
As though we can control that crookedness.
Yes.
I like Brian Stevenson, who talks about brokenness, that he realized that he wants to correct things, the broken, because he's broken too. So there's this way, I think, that our humility even comes from that understanding that we are not made straight.
Exactly. Yes. And a recognition of the crookedness of things and of circumstance and of our lives and whatever we may have achieved prompts us to a certain humility. And humility is the civic virtue we need now.
Big time. I love that. On that note, which, I kept thinking of you during both conventions, but nobody's talking about humility. So on that note, here we have our DJ who's going to give us some questions.
That's right. Hi, everybody. My name is Shane. I'm an event manager here at Town Hall Seattle, and we're going to move now to audience Q&A. If you're watching in Crowdcast, you can submit those down below using the Ask a Question button. If you're on YouTube, we're keeping tabs on that, and you can put your questions in the chat. We just ask that you keep your questions short and concise and in the form of a question, just so that we can get through everybody's questions in the appropriate manner here. So our first question comes from Peter, and Peter asks, what are actions that we as individuals can do to create distance from our current view of success, especially for those who benefit from the privileges of credentialism?
Well, thanks to Peter for a great question. I make a number of suggestions about how we can begin to do this in the book. One of them is to question whether we really want universities to serve as arbiters of opportunity, as the definers of the merits and the credentials that a meritocratic society rewards. It's resulted in great prestige and centrality in our culture to universities. But my worry is not only does this exclude a lot of people, but it also, the sorting, turning universities into sorting machines, threatens to crowd out their educational mission. And so I think we need to invest massively in other forms of learning that matter to a great many people, including two-year community colleges, including technical and vocation training centers, not only because that's where the majority of Americans actually learn what they need to know to contribute to the world of work and to their communities, but also because I think we should redress the steep inequality, the hierarchy of prestige that separates selective brand name universities from these other forms of learning. And I also don't think we should limit and sequester civic education in four-year colleges and universities and then have a meritocratic tournament to figure out who has access to that. I think we also need to diffuse learning and access to civic education and liberal arts learning throughout the society, in workplaces and in other settings beyond the university. What do you think, Anna?
Lifelong learning.
Yeah.
You know, I had a chance to do something with the healthcare workers union, and I was really fascinated with how they train certain ones among them. Sometimes people who are not very high up on that rung, say people who are working in homes, to convince folks they need to join the union. And I said, well, tell me what you say. And it was like extraordinary oratory. I mean, extraordinary. So that I think there are different, I always wonder why, if sports teams can find people anywhere, in any neighborhood who can jump high, run fast, or if unions can figure out how to educate people from any point in the trajectory to do certain things, we give up on people.
Right.
And we think of talent in too many very specific ways. It's like you write in the book about what would have happened to LeBron James if he had, say something about that. I love that one about LeBron James. What would have happened if he needed to make frescoes? Say something about that.
Okay.
Well, where you live and where you live, right?
You gave away the punchline, Anna, but LeBron James is a great basketball player, and he makes tens of millions of dollars, and he works very hard, but he's also very gifted. But is it really his doing that he has those athletic gifts, or is that his good luck? And more than that, Anna, to the point you're raising, the fact that he lives in a society that happens to be crazy about basketball, is that really his doing, or is that his good luck? And I suggest if he lived back during the Renaissance, they weren't that interested in basketball back then. They liked fresco painters better. So this is one other dimension of the contingency that enters into that. But could I just pick up, Anna, on the point you made about unions and the kind of learning that can go on in unions, which need not only be about wages and working conditions, important though those things are. In the late 19th century, the most influential union in America was called the Knights of Labor. And one of their demands, in addition to demands for better pay and shorter hours and so on, was reading rooms in factories.
I love this part.
So that workers could read newspapers and magazines and inform themselves about public affairs so that they could be meaningful participants in democratic life. Mm-hmm. And this is an example of the diffusion of learning, including civic learning, that I think we've lost and need to try to recover and renew.
Well, because the workplace doesn't care about anything except certain productivity. Do you know that Sidney Poitier arrived in this country without being able to read? You know who taught him how? He was a dishwasher. A white dishwasher taught him how to read the paper.
Wow.
We wouldn't have had Sidney Poitier because he wouldn't have been able to do an audition.
Amazing.
Let's take another question.
All right. So this question comes from Kelsey. Kelsey asks, Dr. Sandel, I lost the question for a moment there. Sorry. Okay.
You're doing great.
Dr. Sandel, what are the drivers behind the acceptance of mediocrity as the dominant attitude?
I think the drivers behind meritocracy, and it's intensified in recent decades, are, well, two things. One is political. Meritocracy has arisen as an alternative to dealing with inequality through structural reform of the economy, because it seems easier to say, you aspire individually, you go get a college degree, and then mobility will solve the problem, and we don't need to change the structure of the economy. We can carry on with a kind of neoliberal globalization project. That's part of it. But there's another appeal of meritocracy, which runs deeper. And Anna touched on this with her brilliant parable, which is the idea of self-making, of thinking of ourselves as self-made and self-sufficient. The meritocratic idea that I can rise if chances are equal. I can rise by dint of my own doing, my own effort, my own talents, and therefore be responsible for my fate, and therefore deserve the rewards that go with my success. That's an appealing idea of freedom, of human agency. I can make it on my own.
You can make it if you try.
You can make it if you try. Barack Obama took that phrase from a popular song. He used it in speeches 140 times during his presidency. You can make it if you try. It's inspiring in one way, but I'm trying to suggest it's invidious in another. And I've tried to bring out the harsh message and judgment it inflicts on those who don't make it, at least who don't make it in these terms, even though they may be doing very valuable work and making valuable contributions to the society. Those contributions are not recognized or appreciated or valorized or
except now we're starting to do that, right? Because of COVID.
Well, what do you this is a really interesting question, Anna, and let me put the question to you. There does seem to be some hope, some glimmer of hope in our appreciation during COVID. Those of us who work from home, who work remotely, we realize how deeply we rely on workers we often overlook, and we call them essential workers, and we put up signs thanking them. Now, we haven't found our way to a living wage and maybe to a paid sick leave and to health care for all of those workers, especially in the gig economy. And we haven't gone further and considered whether there should be a kind of wage subsidy to bring their pay and recognition in line with the importance of the work they do. But Anna, do you think that this moment of the pandemic will be a turning point in this respect for the dignity of work?
It just like the murder of George Floyd puts us in a very malleable moment.
Right.
But it depends on how long this goes on. Will we have time to really reform anything? I mean, those essential workers, as you say, what's the boss? We can do anything about the fact that the boss makes 40 or 400 times more money than that individual, right? I live in New York City. Within a week that we were on lockdown, the city emptied because people in New York City have options. They have other homes, 3 and 4 other homes. That's why New York, recovered up out of being the epicenter. Nobody was there. One of the private schools in New York, the Avenue School, is opening up a branch in the Hamptons. Wow. So nobody has to come back. So, I mean, I think that it needs to happen, but we need leadership, Michael. There has to be somebody, a real leader. We don't know who that is. We should be open to that leader being unbidden, who can take this moment and make some fabric out of it, some texture.
And could I just, Shane, if you'll permit me, pick up on one aspect of Anna's observation just now. We haven't talked much, except in passing so far, about the Black Lives Matter movement. This seems to me, along with the possible recognition of essential workers, the Black Lives Matter movement has become a moment of opening and possibility for a politics of the common good, because it's a multi-racial, multi-generational movement. International, and it's raising fundamental questions of a kind that we often shrink from in our public discourse about what is a just society, how do we confront the past, what would it mean to bring about a politics of the common good with regard to racial justice and justice generally. So this, I think, along with the recognition of the importance of essential workers, I think these are moments of possibility, whether we redeem them in ways that lead us to a more just society. It's an open question, but it's up to us.
Let's take another question.
All right. So this next question comes from Wendy, and Wendy asks, where and when was the common good better acknowledged?
That's a wonderful question.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of answers for that. That's a beautiful question.
Right. I should say, first of all, that there is no golden age that I'm pointing to when the common good was fully realized. So I think we have to look for moments in our past and in various places when there was an attention to the politics of the common good, at least a debate about the common good, rather than a purely managerial, technocratic kind of public discourse. One example, in terms of sharing the benefits of economic growth across classes, were in the 30 years after the Second World War, when there was tremendous economic growth that redounded to the benefit of all classes of society. But since 1980, almost all of the economic growth has been captured by the top 20%, and the bottom half have captured almost none. So that would be, with regard to the broad distribution of the fruits of prosperity, that would be an example. The civil rights movement and the civic activism and idealism that it stirred, transforming our politics, that would be another. So I would begin, if we look in the relatively recent past, those would be two examples, but it's important to recognize that it's not a matter of finding a golden age. It's a matter of finding glimmers, intimations, openings, sources of hope for a better kind of politics, a morally more robust kind of public discourse than the kind to which we've become accustomed.
And also, I think little moments of stimulus. I mean, some of the things that happened came out of really good intentions. You speak about after the Second World War. Who was the president of Harvard who decided this university shouldn't only be for aristocrats and they're, older than the Republic, right? It shouldn't be just for the aristocrats and their descendants. What was his name?
Conant, James Conant.
Yeah, a lot of buildings named after him.
Right.
And so just say a little bit about what his impulse was. And it didn't go completely right, but it shook something up, right?
Right. He was troubled that Harvard and these Ivy League colleges were essentially finishing schools for the children of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant aristocracy, upper class. He wanted to change that. He wanted to bring about a more mobile society. So he brought in the SAT, which was then seen as a way of giving kids from middle class and less privileged places the chance to demonstrate their gifts. The sad paradox is that the test that he saw as a test of natural aptitude, untainted by class privilege and advantage, has turned into an engine that replicates and precisely class advantage, because today there is almost a perfect correlation at every income level between the income of your family and the chances of, the probability of the SAT score you will get. You could plot it on two graphs and it would be almost a perfect correlation. So he had a noble impulse, but the meritocratic mechanism that he embraced, which was a kind of idealism in its time, has hardened, this meritocracy has hardened into a kind of hereditary aristocracy, in some ways similar to the one it replaced, though those who win have a somewhat different profile than they did back in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s.
You know what, Michael, I think we're probably coming on our last question, but we cannot leave this conversation with the most radical thing that you're suggesting.
Right.
And I think that has to do with who gets into Harvard and how they get in.
Well, what I've suggested.
Plan. Which, by the way, a friend of mine and I, been talk about the book together, and she's a Californian. She said, "Well, Cal's going that way." But anyway, your plan.
Well, it's interesting that the UC system, by the way, has decided no longer to require the SAT, which is a sign of the times, going all the way back to Conant's ambition for the SAT. But what Anna wants me to tell about is my proposal, which may get me into a lot of trouble in my neighborhood, which is, here's the background. Places like Harvard and Stanford get over 40,000 applicants for about 2,000 places. And the admissions officers tell us most of those who apply are very well qualified and could do the work and do it well. So my proposal is take out those who are not well qualified to flourish at these places and to contribute to the education of their classmates. Take out those not qualified. Then with the rest, how many would it be? Maybe 25,000, 30,000, 20,000? I don't know exactly. But take that group and run a lottery to pick the 2,000 who would be admitted. I suspect that the quality of discussion in my classroom would not be any less interesting or vital or intellectually engaged. That's my hunch. But more than that, well, two reasons. First, for this proposal, it's not possible to make fine-grained judgments of merit about who will grow up at the age of 18, who will grow up to contribute to society. I'm a baseball fan. Nolan Ryan, one of the greatest pitchers in the history of baseball, struck out more people than any pitcher in history, was drafted when he was 18. I think he was something like the 249th draft pick. Tom Brady, probably the greatest quarterback in NFL history, was the 199th draft pick. If it's not possible with any confidence to predict the ability, so narrowly circumscribed an ability as throwing a baseball or a football at age 18, how can we think that we can predict who will really have the broadest impact on society? But more than that, the lottery summons chance to chasten merit's hubris. It's a way of sending a message to the students who are admitted and those who are not about the role of luck in all of this. And that luck is there even without my lottery proposal. So why not make it explicit as a way of beginning to chip away, at least, at the meritocratic hubris that has proven to be the dark side of meritocracy for the winners and for those left behind alike. What do you think, Anna?
Well, I'm thinking so many things. Maybe we should end with the story of your chemistry teacher.
Right. My biology teacher. Right. Well,
because there's something there that's linked to what you're saying.
There is.
Go ahead.
There is. And it's back to chance. It's back to the unbidden. It's back to to Memphis, the unbidden mutt. But I was telling you, and Anna, you invited me to tell about that 8th grade math class where they seated us in accordance with according to our GPA. Needless to say, that bred a hyper-competitive, unhealthy atmosphere. So that by the time we got to high school, we were obsessed with grades, not only our own, but everybody else's too. And my 10th grade biology teacher, he was a man named Mr. Farnham. He wore a bow tie. His classroom teemed with snakes, salamanders, fish, mice, and other fascinating wildlife. He was troubled by this. And so one day he gave us a pop quiz. He told us to take out a piece of paper, number 1 to 15, and answer true or false. And the student said, but you haven't given us the questions. And he said, think of a statement and write down whether it's true or false. And the students became very agitated. And they said, well, is this going to count toward our grade? And he said, yes. And this, I'll just read a couple of sentences that conclude this story about Mr. Farnham. At the time, I found this an amusing, if eccentric, classroom joke. But in retrospect, I see that Mr. Farnham was trying in his way to push back against the tyranny of merit. He was trying to get us to step back from the sorting and the striving long enough to marvel at the salamanders.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for this book. I think yesterday was the official date that it hits the shelves, the metaphoric shelves. And I believe the book has many stories and images and ideas that are so important right now. And I think the book will give students courage, a new kind of courage to rethink their education, to rethink what they're in. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much.
And I want to thank everybody for tuning in this evening, and also Dr. Sandel and Ms. Smith for being with us. If you enjoyed this event, you can find many more like it on our website, townhallseattle.org. And we hope you'll consider making a donation, as your support will allow us to continue to provide events just like this one. If you are interested in purchasing a copy of Dr. Sandel's book, The Tyranny of Merit, What's Become of the Common Good, please use the link on this livestream page to purchase through our friends at Third Place Books. And again, I want to thank everybody for being here. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.